states reviewing how to manage Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program dollars, Shapiro's spending in Pennsylvania investigated, and America's talking energy, plus nonprofit red flags. When they get taxpayer dollars, what kinds of internal controls should they have? That's all coming up here with the Center Square Daily for Wednesday, February 18th, 2026. I'm your host, Greg Bishop. Thanks for joining us. As you'll find at the Center Square, Arizona, you have the Senate there passing 4 bills to reform the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. The Arizona Senate passing those bills seeking to tackle waste, fraud, and abuse in that state's management of SNAP. One bill, it would authorize the Arizona Department of Economic Security to review multiple sources, including out-of-state food stamp activity, incarceration records, death records, child support data, and lottery winning records. Another measure adds a work requirement for individuals 60 or younger to receive food assistance. Yet a separate measure, it aims to reduce Arizona's SNAP payment error rates to below 3% by December 30th of 2030. Now, Arizonans, they have a SNAP error rate at 8.84%. For people not familiar with what the SNAP error rate is, it is a combination of both underpayments and overpayments, but the vast majority of that error rate in each of these states is to overpayments. Now, if Arizona doesn't get its SNAP payment error rate below the 6% threshold that the federal government's putting in by fiscal year 2028, the state's taxpayers would have to pay between $150 to $200 million to cover the difference in the cost. Other states facing similar high costs for local taxpayers if they don't get those error rates down. The highest 2024 SNAP error rates was in Alaska, 24.66%. The Washington, D.C. area had over 17% of an error rate. New Mexico, 14.6%. New Jersey, 14.3%. And Maryland at 14.1%. Again, those double-digit SNAP error rates. They need to get those down below 6%, or those states' taxpayers will have to cover that difference. In Illinois, the error rate is 11.5%. State Representative Dan Ugasti yesterday, he says that Illinois poorly manages that food subsidy program.
The cut in SNAP is coming because we don't properly manage our SNAP accounts. It's because we have too many irregularities within our accounts that we're going to suffer the biggest hit. And that's the same for every state in the union. It doesn't matter who it's being managed by. And prior to this administration, we did much better. We would suffer barely any, if any, penalty whatsoever. So any penalty coming our way for SNAP account is because of mismanagement within this administration.
How they go about getting that error rate down in Illinois has yet to be seen. In Maryland, State Representative Julie Polakovich-Carr, she raised concerns about the impacts on free school meals for the changes coming to the SNAP program from the federal government.
Unfortunately, because of recent actions by the federal government, the $10 million annual appropriation mandated in this bill is unlikely to result in an expansion of the free school meals program. Instead, this legislation is much more likely to serve as a key defense to hold the line against childhood hunger. As this committee knows all too well, H.R. 1 made cuts to SNAP and Medicaid that will result in approximately 500,000 Marylanders losing access to these safety net programs. When families lose SNAP or Medicaid benefits, their children also lose direct certification for free school meals. That means they no longer automatically qualify to receive a free school meal.
Now, Maryland's error rate is 13.64%. In Iowa, State Senator Sarah Throne Garrett, she worries about proposed updates in that state and how SNAP will be impacted.
Just looking at which foods are allowed and which are not, it does not have a clear demonstration of encouraging healthy choices, but what it certainly does do is make it harder to use SNAP. And that should not be the goal for any of our legislation. There is also some very concerning language in the legislation that if Iowa does not participate in this waiver process, that we might lose our ability to participate in the SNAP program as a whole or the summer EBT program.
Iowa's error rate for SNAP is 6.14%. Some of the changes coming down the pike from the One Big Beautiful Bill President Donald Trump signed in July of last year deals with eligibility requirements and getting those SNAP rates down. And let's take a look at some of the other lowest SNAP rate error rates in various states. South Dakota is at 3.28%, Virgin Islands at 3.5%, Idaho almost 3.6%, Wisconsin at 4.7%, and Wyoming at 5.12%. All of that underneath that 6% threshold. So this is going to be an ongoing concern for state taxpayers across the country as states with double-digit error rates look to try to get those rates down to below 6%. And whether or not they can do that depends on the taxpayer dollars locally and how much they're going to be on the hook for. And as states continue to manage how their tax dollars are used for social service programs, our investigators looking at the receipts of taxpayer spending by Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. Let's now connect with investigative reporter for the Center Square, Mark Stricherz, about his story looking into luxurious hotel spending. Mark, thanks for taking time with us. Interesting story you've got here about Governor Josh Shapiro. What did you find out?
Thanks for having me on the show. Governor Shapiro spent about $1,700 for 3 nights at 2 luxury high-end hotels in Pittsburgh 3 years ago at the Labor Day Parade, September 2023, and then last January for President Carter's funeral in Washington, D.C. He stayed at the Conrad Hotel in downtown Washington, and the one in Pittsburgh was at the Kimpton Hotel Monaco.
This obviously is something that requires FOIA requests. Walk us through that process of, how you determine how to ask the question, what you're looking for specifically, and just how long it takes to get that information back.
Well, it wasn't quite a FOIA request. It's through a state records request. And Pennsylvania is one of the 2 states that I cover. The other one is New York. And you just go through these states and ask their agencies through their right to know laws or the equivalent of a FOIA law, and go through the agencies, which records do you have as far as outside travel by state officials, what their personal expenses are. And at the end of last month, I put in a request for what were Governor Shapiro's outside travel expenses and hotel stays. And a couple days later, I found that he stayed at the Kimpton Hotel Monaco there in downtown Pittsburgh, and the Conrad Hotel. And I looked them up. They were pretty pricey. Each night was about $500, and looked up, and sure enough, each hotel was a 4 diamond hotel, and that's one rank from the top 5 stars. So I knew that this seemed to be a story that taxpayers and readers would be interested in.
Yeah, no question. With $1,100 for a room at the Kimpton Hotel, you also found out how much he spent on a meal at that hotel. What in the world would cost $30.75? Right.
That's just a function of each hotel at the time that he stayed, to be fair to him. When he was at the in the Kimpton Hotel Monaco, it was the time of the big Labor Day parade. There hadn't been a parade because of COVID for, I believe, 4 years. So when he ordered the oatmeal breakfast with pecans, side of toast, and a large pot of coffee, that's $56. Any other time it'd be far less, or significantly less. But at that time it was $56. The taxpayers had to pay for that. And when he was at the Conrad, he paid $30 for soup and salad. If it had not been for President Carter's funeral, he would have paid maybe, who knows, $10 less. But the hotels, especially the pricey ones, they charge their patrons more. So that's why the taxpayers had to pay more for that.
Mark, we also had a graphic air there about how much other taxpayer costs are associated with the governor in Pennsylvania. Obviously, security is important for elected officials, especially at that level of government. But it's up there. I mean, you found $1.1 million for his family's home security, including landscaping and groundkeeping.
Right. Well, a 38-year-old Corey Balmer, did break into the governor's mansion last April and set the part of the mansion ablaze while his family was sleeping in it. So any fair-minded person can understand the concerns of the governor and his family and Pennsylvania officials that they need more security for not only the governor's mansion but also his private house in the the governor's private house in the Philadelphia suburbs. The question is, how much should taxpayers be on the hook for? $290,000 for landscaping expenses. What does that involve exactly? Those are, I think everybody can agree, those are, and that's in state officials have raised, especially Republicans have raised questions about how much the governor should be, taxpayers should be spending on those expenses.
Yeah, 1.1 million for the family home security, but they're also looking for $32 million for updated security after that fire from last year.
Right. Well, arson attack. Yeah. So there's a lot more expenses for security for the governor's mansion there in Harrisburg. My story doesn't look at all the expenses, but $32 million is large amount, expensive. A lot of money to upgrade the governor's mansion there.
We're talking with Mark Stricherz, investigative reporter for the Center Square. You can find his story about spending from Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro to stay in a luxury hotel where he got a meal, soup and salad with a soda, $30.75. Oatmeal with pecans and toast and a large pot of coffee, almost $57. Definitely some high prices there at those luxurious hotels. Mark, is this just relegated, this type of spending, to, say, the governor, or do you think in Pennsylvania and really all across the country, there's governments that are giving taxpayers the bill for junkets, for hotel stays, for a whole host of other things, including luxurious meals?
Yes, this practice has been going on for decades, maybe even time immemorial. Actually, I was just looking at congressional records, House disbursements of members of Congress using limousines on taxpayer dollars. So the question is, how much does it go on? And usually, oftentimes, public officials will use their campaign accounts to pay for luxury items like the Kimpton Hotel Monaco. But when taxpayers have to pay for it, people get upset. Definitely. But yes, the practice has been going on for a while, as you know, as a reporter yourself.
Yeah, in Illinois, we've tracked park district associations going to annual conferences and charging taxpayers for hotel stays and meals, and municipal associations doing the same thing, annual junkets to put on the taxpayer rolls. And actually, right, it's led to some accountability and some changes in some local governments, right, just simply by putting a light on this taxpayer spending.
Right. At one point, I should have mentioned maybe in the story too, in the interview here, was that these are 4 diamond hotels by the AAA, usually called the American Automobile Association. Like 5% or fewer of all hotels are 4 stars. To be 5 stars, that's like 0.3%. It's like there's only a few hundred in the whole country, maybe even North America, that get the 5 stars. So 4-star. This high end. This is not the Super 8 motel or even Holiday Inn or Days Inn. This is the not quite the top tier, but close to it.
And obviously, taxpayer spending of utmost importance. States across the country grappling with tight budgets. The federal government looking to limit how much federal tax dollars are going to these various states. So greatly appreciate you taking that fine-tooth comb and finding these types of records.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, now it's time for America's Talking with energy policy and ratepayer protections coming up in state houses all across the country as we see energy rates increase in various parts of the country. In Kansas, State Senator Michael Fagg, he talks about regulating EV charging costs.
SB 80 would apply to electric suppliers that provide, own, operate, or maintain their own electric vehicle fast charging stations. This bill would require that such retail electric suppliers to offer a fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory rates and services to entities that provide similar electric vehicle charging services, and would prohibit any actions that provide any unreasonable competitive advantage for the retail electric suppliers' fast charging stations. SB 380 would also provide a retail electric supplier from including any costs or expenses relating to fast charging stations in the rate base of the retail electric supplier, which prohibits recovery of such costs or expenses from ratepayers.
That measure looking to protect ratepayers from those EV charging costs that may be implemented by those energy producers. In Georgia, State Senator Chuck Hefstelter, he wants to bring about the oversight group that would look at rates in that state.
This would set up a consumer utility council like 46 states currently have and like we used to have, that would give the ratepayers legal standing on discovery. This was disbanded during the recession, and as people like our former appropriations chair Jack Hill said, they were scrambling for money. It never was reinstituted and repealed, but I do think it's important with the billions of dollars that are going on here that we have somebody that has legal standing and represents the consumers.
Now, in Oklahoma, they're focusing on data centers and the energy usage that they may use and the infrastructure involved there. State Representative Brad Bowles has a measure to address that.
House Bill 2092 would require data centers to pay their share of infrastructure costs associated with their significant electricity demands. It would prevent those costs from being passed on to residential, industrial, agricultural, and commercial ratepayers through higher utility rates. Move for adoption. Yield for.
So that measure advancing there in Oklahoma. In Maryland, legislators heard from Steve Ross about oversight being considered in that state for ratepayers.
So as introduced, basically a public service company, in this case, an investor-owned gas, electric, or gas and electric company, unless otherwise ordered by PSC, couldn't initiate a proceeding that may lead to a rate change unless it notifies customers of the proceeding and prepares and publishes a 10-year rate trend report that meets specified requirements. It did a couple other things too related to sending information in emails and or bill inserts, and required PSC to develop and publish an annual rate report for each of those public service companies, and allowed OPC to bring a case, actually required OPC to bring a case to PSC if it determines an annual rate report contained incorrect or misleading information.
A lot of this is oversight to ensure that ratepayers don't get hit with higher costs without there being an extra set of eyes there, including just simple notification of such rates. But in Illinois, Republican State Representative Patrick Windhorst, he criticized the Land of Lincoln's majority Democrats for focusing on green energy policies at taxpayer and ratepayer cost.
While many Illinois citizens are struggling to afford groceries, gas, and rising utility bills, Democrats have also prioritized spending on the Green New Deal. Billions of dollars spent to subsidize windmills, solar panels, and electric cars. And the result has been seen our power grid threatened and the utility bills of our constituents shoot through the roof.
And that's America's Talking, clips from across the country looking at energy policy. We'll be right back with more from the Center Square Daily.
One of the best things that ever happened to my life is that I was arrested.
For months, we've been covering the fallout from the Blake decision, a 2021 move by the state Supreme Court that made the drug law unconstitutional. People were behind bars who shouldn't have been, not to mention there's been millions of dollars in fees and fines paid out by people convicted of drug crimes now considered unconstitutional.
What has become known as the Blake fix refers to legislation passed in Washington state to restore penalties for drug possession. That came after a 2021 Washington State Supreme Court decision referred to as State v. Blake, the Blake decision, and it made the state's previous drug possession laws unconstitutional. In February of 2021, the state's highest court ruled that Washington's felony drug possession law was unconstitutional because it did not require the prosecution to prove that someone knowingly possessed an illegal substance. In the case of Shannon Blake, the court ruled it was unfair to criminalize an individual for possessing drugs they didn't know were on their person. And in this case, Blake argued she didn't know there was a baggie of drugs, methamphetamine, in the jeans that she had supposedly received from a friend. Now, the ruling meant that anyone with a past conviction for simple drug possession was entitled to have that conviction vacated entirely from the record and potentially receive a refund for any fines they had paid. In essence, the ruling decriminalized drug possession in the state of Washington. Washington lawmakers came back and passed a temporary measure that classified knowing drug possession as a simple misdemeanor. This was a stopgap law, and it was set to expire on July 1st of 2023.
In the ruling, the drug possession law that had been in effect for decades in Washington state was ruled unconstitutional. Fortunately, the legislature, which was in session at the time, was able to act quickly, and they passed a law in 2021 that recriminalized possession of hard drugs, although there was a lot of criteria that was required before anybody could be arrested. So essentially what happened is law enforcement, providers, advocates had to deal with a new law that was implemented quickly, but what we quickly found is it wasn't very effective.
So what happened is the legislature put off and decriminalized the use of drugs for the last 2 years. This year we need to look at a fix, an easy fix. It's a one-word fix saying knowingly possess drugs. Why this is so important, that you've seen for 2 years the dehumanity of people on the streets, our next generation, the use of drugs.
During a special legislative session in May of 2023, the state legislature passed Senate Bill 5536, making knowing possession of a controlled or counterfeit substance a gross misdemeanor and allocating funding for treatment and diversion programs.
I was introduced to drugs at a really young age. And despite my sort of inner conscience telling me that that was a poor route to go, my environment had a massive effect on me, and I ended up becoming a drug addict. And any addict that I've ever met in my life, including myself, you're compelled to, meet the needs of your addiction.
We cannot offer hope for these people that are in the throes of addiction. What good are we?
The incarceration, first of all, was really necessary because what that gave me the opportunity to do was separate myself from a destructive path that I could not stop on my own. When I was in the Regional Justice Center, I got the opportunity to do a 60-day inpatient program where I woke up in my jail cell, got myself ready, ate breakfast, and I went to a room over to the left, and I spent the majority of the entire day, Monday through Friday, in that room, addressing underlying causes, looking at, things that contribute to drug use, et cetera, et cetera.
So this new law provides a couple options. First off, it makes possession of hard drugs a gross misdemeanor. Second off, it does make it an arrestable offense, but it encourages officers to divert folks to services if that's possible. It encourages the prosecutor to divert folks to services if it's available and possible, and gives people a chance to vacate their conviction or not be convicted at all if they follow the treatment programs.
The ruling impacts over 200,000 felony drug possession charges dating back to 1971 and an estimated additional 150,000 misdemeanor marijuana charges, according to Washington courts.
One of the best things that ever happened to my life is that I was arrested. I would not have been able to stop on my own. And obviously there's a lot of work that I need to be doing in the world. And there are a lot of me's out there that are so capable and intelligent, but they cannot figure out how to get out of the maze. And that's what Blake did.
Welcome back to the Center Square Daily. I'm your host, Greg Bishop, and with all of the focus on fraud and waste and abuse in how federal taxpayer dollars are being managed by states, you have to also consider how much money is going to non-government organizations or NGOs. These are nonprofit groups that get grants by state and federal taxpayers to conduct certain services. And there's been a lot of focus and attention on trying to shore that up. If you recall, last year, the Department of Government Efficiency with the Trump administration delving deep into federal spending. But I talked with Lisa Stevenson. She's a partner at NPO Accountants that works directly with non-government organizations getting taxpayer resources to operate certain types of services. And she gives some tips for avoiding red flags that NGOs could possibly get if they're not properly managed. I talked with her about audits that happen, what triggers those audits for federal tax dollars being used. She said audits only come for those groups that are getting $1 million or more.
So anyone, any organization receiving less than $1 million, there really isn't proper oversight at times, because they can have multiple federal funders, but the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. In fact, what I had mentioned to Lauren, the fraud that I discussed, which of course I can't name any names, but it involved the nonprofit billing the same expenses to multiple government grants. And so that shouldn't be allowed to happen, but there's no oversight at the federal level. And so until someone else, whether it's an independent auditor comes in and they do the audit, or unless internal staff becomes aware and then they, blow the whistle, those things can go on for quite a while and be undetected.
So how those dollars ultimately are tracked if they don't have those audits for grant recipients under $1 million, she says, is something that's important to focus on, because these are taxpayer resources and limited taxpayer resources at that.
And the reason why it's important is, again, kind of back to, because this isn't the organization's money, and, fraud can happen in any organization, whether you're for-profit or nonprofit. But if no one's looking, that's how those things happen. One of the things that we really tell nonprofits that they need to be on the alert for, some red flags, if you would, is they really need to look at the organization's internal controls. And, that can be physical controls, like if you have paper checks, don't leave them laying out, or don't share passwords, in terms of technology. But the biggest internal control that probably needs to be addressed, and it's a lot of the work I do, is designing their segregation of duties. And so for an organization to have a proper segregation of duties, they're going to need 3 people involved with every accounting process. And that's when the board really can step in and place themselves in some of these roles. They don't really want to be in the day-to-day, and they shouldn't be in the day-to-day, but on a monthly basis, they can be reviewing certain things to make sure that there is proper oversight. Some of the recommendations that we give is, for board members specifically, at some point they should verify that the executive director's payroll is what the board has approved to be their payroll. Because, payroll is an internal process. It's probably either processed by the executive director or an accountant, but unless a board member asks to see a payroll report, they really don't know for sure that, what the executive director is being paid. So they really should verify that. One of the other easy ones that I feel like it doesn't often happen until it gets pointed out is a board member should be reviewing the credit card statement and receipts of the executive director, and not assigning that to a subordinate of the executive director.
The conversation with Lisa Stevenson with NPO Accountants and the red flags that could pop up for non-government organizations receiving state tax dollars. She also talked about the consequences for non-government organizations who are found to have potential waste. Is it intentional? Is it not intentional? That doesn't seem to matter when it comes to the consequences.
Whether or not it's an unintentional error, or whether or not it's an intentional fraud, the organization is in a position where they might have to pay that money back. And so, regardless of why it happened or how, they're on the hook to the government entity. And so, that's the risk. And when you sit on a board, it's now your name associated with that organization. Hopefully, when you sit on a board, you ensure that there's D&O insurance, so that you're not personally ever sued for anything that happens, that's out of your control. But, regardless of being sued, your name is still attached to that board. And so you have a duty, you have a responsibility. And the government doesn't care that, like if let's say it's an executive director and they, commit fraud. They don't care that it's that person. They are going to criminally prosecute, but they are still going to hold the nonprofit accountable to repay the money. So a board can't, assume, well, if the executive director does that, then they're going to have to be the one pay. Well, certainly they will be prosecuted, but it doesn't mean that the government entity is going to give the nonprofit entity a pass, because it really is their responsibility to make sure that those controls were in place.
And more on those internal controls, Lisa says that it's much needed because you don't want to find things after the fact and be having to adhere to those consequences of getting those tax dollars back to the appropriate hands.
I feel really strongly that the internal controls have to be in place to prevent it from occurring, because once it gets detected by an auditor, it's already happened. It's already possibly too late. Because an organization closes its year and then maybe 3, sometimes 6 months or longer later is when the auditor comes in. So, that fraud could have happened a whole year ago or more, and that's not a very timely manner in which to detect something. So, really, it's the whole ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If they have internal controls in place that would prevent somebody, or, have these checkpoints every month that would detect, that is really a much better way to handle, preventing fraud. It's the proactivity versus reactivity. Yeah, again, once the auditor finds it, it's a little late.
Again, thanks to Lisa Stevenson with NPO Accountants for that insight on potential red flags NGOs could find if there's mismanagement of your taxpayer resources. From my studios in Central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop. Join us back here Thursday for more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, from around the country, only with the Center Square Daily.